My mother-in-law threatened to take our unborn baby, so we reported her to the hospital. My mother-in-law kept calling our unborn son her baby. Then she told my pregnant wife that one missed feeding and one bad report could be enough for CPS to start asking questions. And if our baby were ever placed with family, she said, he could finally become hers. So we reported her to the hospital. What they discovered cost her the career she had spent more than 20 years building. My name is Daniel, I'm 26, and my wife, Sophie, is 25. We got married earlier this year. Not long afterward, we found out Sophie was pregnant with our first child, a boy. We were excited. Terrified, obviously, but mostly excited. The problem was never the baby. The problem was Sophie's mother, Carol. For as long as I've known Sophie, Carol has treated her less like an adult daughter and more like something she owns. When Sophie was younger, Carol regularly searched her bedroom while she was at school. Not just normal, overly curious parent behavior. She read Sophie's journals, she went through her drawers, she checked her phone and read private conversations with friends. Then she would confront Sophie about the things she found. Imagine being a teenager and having your mother criticize thoughts you had never intended anyone else to read. Sophie learned very early that privacy did not exist in her mother's house. Carol also had a habit of using fear to control her. Whenever something terrible happened to a young woman in the area, Carol would show Sophie the story and explained the same thing could happen to her if she wasn't careful. According to Carol, every stranger was dangerous. Every decision Sophie made could end in disaster, and only Carol knew how to keep her safe. By the time Sophie and I started dating, she was 23 and still felt guilty whenever she made a decision without asking her mother first. The strange thing was that Carol knew exactly how to hide her behavior. Whenever I was around, she was pleasant, helpful, soft-spoken. She called before visiting. She asked permission before entering our apartment. She smiled at me and acted like she respected our relationship. But when she believed I was at work, that version of her disappeared. She showed up without warning. She pushed Sophie into doing favors. She offered to take her shopping or pay for her nails, then asked for something in return once Sophie felt obligated. Sometimes it was paperwork. Sometimes it was an assignment for a class Carol was taking herself. Sometimes it was an email Carol was perfectly capable of writing herself. If Sophie refused, Carol became hurt and offended. She would say things like, "After everything I do for you, you can't do one small thing for me?" Once, Carol drove Sophie more than an hour away from home. While they were there, she asked Sophie to complete a project for her. Sophie said no because she had her own college work to finish. Carol threatened to leave her there. The only reason she didn't was because Sophie called her father and told him what was happening. I repeatedly told Sophie that she didn't have to open the door when Carol arrived unannounced. But that sounds much easier than it feels when the person standing outside is the mother who trained you your entire life to believe that saying no makes you cruel. Then Sophie became pregnant. At first, Carol's behavior looked almost generous. She was thrilled about becoming a grandmother. She bought us a crib, then a baby swing, then clothes, bottles, blankets, and a stroller we had never asked for. Sophie and I were grateful. We weren't wealthy, and preparing for a baby was expensive. Every gift seemed helpful. But then, Carol started attaching strange comments to them. The first time, she was helping Sophie carry baby clothes into the apartment. She looked toward the nursery and said, "My baby is going to be so spoiled." Sophie laughed because she assumed Carol had misspoken. "Your grandson," she corrected, "not your baby." Carol smiled. "Fine, our baby." Sophie corrected her again. "No, my baby." Carol laughed it off. We told ourselves she was simply an excited grandmother. Then it happened again and again. "My baby needs a better crib. My baby is going to love this blanket. My baby will probably look just like me." Every time Sophie corrected her, Carol retreated just enough to make us wonder whether we were overreacting. Then one afternoon, the tone changed. Carol had brought over another bag of supplies. Sophie thanked her. Carol looked around the nursery and said, "Well, I'm buying most of his things. That kind of makes him my baby too." Sophie stared at her. Carol wasn't laughing. It didn't sound like a joke. It sounded like a claim. Around the same time, Sophie's pregnancy became more complicated. Nothing catastrophic, thankfully, but she needed extra appointments and closer monitoring. Then our obstetrician stopped accepting her new insurance, so we had to change providers in the middle of a high-risk pregnancy.
It was stressful. I couldn't always leave work whenever Sophie needed to visit the hospital. Carol worked there, so on a few occasions, she drove Sophie to appointments or to labor and delivery when something felt wrong. We accepted her help because we needed it. That decision gave Carol more access than we realized.
About a week later, she started mentioning medical information that Sophie had never shared with her. At first, it was small. She mentioned a note about Sophie's blood pressure. Then she asked about a lab result. Later, she referred to a medication adjustment that had happened after an appointment Sophie had attended alone. Sophie asked how she knew about it. Carol shrugged. A mother knows. That answer made both of us uncomfortable. Sophie had never told her, I hadn't told her, and there was only one other place where that information existed: Sophie's medical chart. Carol worked at the hospital. She wasn't Sophie's doctor, she wasn't her nurse, she wasn't assigned to her care in any way, but she had access to the hospital's computer systems. When Sophie confronted her, Carol didn't exactly deny looking. She said, "I was only making sure nobody was missing anything," as if secretly reviewing her adult daughter's medical information were a normal act of maternal concern. I told Sophie we needed to report it immediately. She hesitated. Despite everything, Carol was still her mother. Sophie had spent her entire life learning to minimize her behavior, make excuses for her, and protect her from consequences. So instead of reporting Carol, we tried setting firm boundaries. That was our mistake. Sophie told her mother she was no longer allowed to arrive without calling. She told her to stop referring to our son as her baby, and she said that if Carol had accessed her medical information, it had to stop immediately. Carol acted deeply offended. She said we were treating her like a criminal. She said she had only been trying to help. Then she stopped contacting us for several days. We thought she had finally understood. She hadn't. One afternoon, while I was at work, Carol came to our apartment carrying another bag of baby items. Sophie considered not opening the door, but she convinced herself that perhaps her mother was coming to apologize. Carol walked inside and went directly to the nursery. She touched the crib she had purchased and began talking about what would happen after our son was born. She said she would need a key to our apartment. Sophie said no. Carol said she should be in the delivery room in case important decisions needed to be made. Sophie said no again. Carol said Sophie would be tired, emotional, and inexperienced after giving birth. Someone, she explained, would have to make sure the baby was being cared for correctly. Sophie told her there would be no key, no place in the delivery room, and no unannounced visits after the birth. That was when Carol's expression changed. Her voice became cold. Then she said, "It would be a shame if one day you were asleep and the baby was crying because he had missed a feeding." Sophie stared at her. Carol continued, "All it takes is one missed feeding, one bad report, and CPS starts asking questions. Are you threatening me? I'm telling you to be careful. They don't leave babies with people who can't handle them." Then Carol smiled slightly and added, "Sometimes babies are placed with family, and then he really would be my baby." Sophie later told me that the calmness in her voice was more frightening than if she had screamed. Carol wasn't speaking impulsively. She sounded like she had imagined it before. For the first time in her life, Sophie didn't try to soften the situation. She told her mother to get out. Carol immediately started backtracking. She said Sophie had misunderstood her. She said it had been a joke. Then she blamed Sophie's pregnancy hormones for making her overly emotional. When that didn't work, she said maybe she should stop helping us if this was how we were going to treat her. Sophie opened the front door. She told Carol if she didn't leave immediately, she would call the police. Carol left. By the time I came home, Sophie was shaking. She told me exactly what had happened. That was the moment I stopped caring whether reporting Carol would create a family war. This was no longer about an overbearing grandmother. Carol had repeatedly claimed our son as her own. She appeared to have accessed private medical information, and now she had suggested using Child Protective Services to take our baby away. The following morning, we contacted the hospital's compliance and privacy department. We reported the medical details Carol knew without being told. We described her position at the hospital. We gave them the approximate dates when she had mentioned information from Sophie's appointments. We also explained the threat involving CPS. The person taking the complaint did not promise us anything. They only said the hospital would investigate access to Sophie's medical record. I won't pretend Sophie felt relieved after submitting the report. She cried. Not because she thought Carol's behavior was acceptable.
She cried because she understood what an investigation might cost her mother. Carol had worked at that hospital for more than 20 years. Some part of Sophie still hoped the hospital would find an innocent explanation. There wasn't one. About a week later, a compliance officer contacted Sophie. They confirmed her medical chart had been accessed multiple times without a legitimate work-related reason. Not once, multiple times. Some of the access occurred on days when Carol had no professional reason to be anywhere near Sophie's information. The officer said the matter had been escalated internally. They could not tell us what disciplinary action would be taken against an employee. 2 days later, Carol called Sophie screaming. She had been fired. More than 20 years at the hospital, gone. Carol accused Sophie of destroying her life. She said she had sacrificed everything for her daughter, and this was how Sophie repaid her. She insisted that she only looked at the records because she was concerned about the pregnancy. She said she hadn't changed anything, shared anything, or hurt anyone. According to her, looking was not the same as causing harm. Then, the rest of the family became involved. My father-in-law called first. He admitted that Carol had crossed a boundary, but said we could have handled it privately. He said Sophie should have warned her mother that we were going to report her. Her aunt said the CPS comment had obviously been a joke. She accused Sophie of using pregnancy hormones as an excuse to destroy her mother's career. A cousin posted something online about ungrateful children who accept years of support and then abandon their parents. Apparently, buying a crib and a stroller meant Carol had purchased the right to ignore every boundary we established. Then Carol sent Sophie a long message. She said the hospital had overreacted. She said we had turned a family disagreement into a professional investigation. She said she had never genuinely intended to call CPS. But near the end of the message, she wrote, "I was only trying to protect my grandson from your inexperience." That sentence proved she still did not understand. Even after losing her job, she believed the problem was Sophie's inability to appreciate her interference. We acted quickly after that. We transferred Sophie's care to a different hospital network. We added a privacy password to her medical account. We made the new hospital written instructions that Carol was not authorized to receive medical information. We made it clear she was not allowed in the delivery room or the maternity unit. We removed her from every emergency contact list, and we stopped answering her calls. The gifts Carol had bought remained in the nursery for about a week. Then Sophie asked me to pack them away. Not because the crib or clothes had done anything wrong. She simply couldn't look at them without remembering her mother saying, "My baby." Our son was born 6 weeks later, healthy, loud, perfect. Carol was not there. She learned about the birth through other relatives after we were already home. That caused another wave of angry messages. Then, eventually, silence. We have heard pieces of the story Carol tells other people. According to her, she lost her job because her daughter chose her mother over her own mother. She says the hospital punished a loyal employee for caring too much. She tells people that we are withholding her grandson to control and humiliate her. She still presents herself as the victim. Most of the time, I don't care what version she tells. But there is one part of the situation I still think about. Before the threat, Carol had helped us. She drove Sophie to the hospital when I couldn't leave work. She bought supplies we genuinely needed. She had been part of Sophie's life for 25 years, and the complaint we filed ended her career. I don't regret protecting my wife or our son, but sometimes I wonder whether we should have confronted Carol one final time before involving the hospital. Maybe we should have told her that if she ever accessed the chart again, we would report her. Then I remember that we had already confronted her. We had told her to stop. She responded by threatening Sophie with CPS. Sophie says the report did not destroy her mother's career. Carol's own decisions did. She chose to access information she had no legitimate reason to view. She chose to ignore every boundary. She chose to speak about our baby as though she had a claim to him. And she chose to suggest that she could use one of Sophie's mistakes to take him away. All we did was stop protecting her from the consequences. Still, the fallout was enormous. Sophie lost her mother, even if their relationship had always been unhealthy. Our son lost a grandmother before he had the chance to know her, and Carol lost her job she had held for more than 2 decades. So tell me honestly, was reporting Carol the only responsible way to protect our baby? Or should we have given her one final chance, knowing the complaint could destroy the career she had spent more than 20 years building? Drop your verdict in the comments.
And subscribe, because here, one story always leads to another.